Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to the Senior Empowerment Series. I recognize a number of faces from the past, so what we're going to do today, after we introduce the guests, the guest panelists. Hi, Margaret. After we introduce the guests, there's a couple handouts there. We'll talk about 50 or 60 minutes up here, and then you can write your questions on the handout there. You can see if things come up in your mind along the way, and we can answer those in the last 30 minutes. So we'll be here about an hour and a half. So we had originally had the program director from the Alzheimer's Association, and he had an emergency meeting. He had to bow out, so we got the prior program director from the Alzheimer's Association, Ron. This is Ron Epps, and this is Dr. Stephen Hightower, who's been in geriatric medicine, and now I'm going to have them give an introduction for themselves. So Ron, Ron's a friend of mine also in the Rotary Club, so we know each other from there too.
So as Fritz said, I was formerly the program director. I currently actually am the advocacy director for the ARC of New Mexico. So we help individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. But prior to that, I was at the Alzheimer's Association for about 3 years. My introduction to the disease, though, was my mom. And so my mom actually was a long-term sufferer of the disease. Eventually died at 84 after having, officially she was diagnosed with mixed dementia for 20 years. And so saw the whole process of the disease from when she was just kind of forgetful to the very end when it wasn't very pretty at all. Stephen, I'll let you go next.
My name is Stephen Hightower. I grew up in Hobbs, went to undergraduate school at NMSU, medical school at UNM, and practiced internal medicine and geriatrics for a little more than 40 years. It was a wonderful experience. Retired, COVID came, and I went back again for a couple of more years to try to help out. I became interested in this at a time when there was some challenges with my own memory. I got tested. I have moderate cognitive impairment, so I don't want you to be afraid of it. It's possible to occur. And so I became very much an advocate for trying to have people evaluated for that, because if you know you have it, it helps in a lot of the things that you're going to be doing. And it also, more than that, it really helps you understand, what can I do to get better? And there are a lot of things you can do to get better. So it's not to be feared, but if it happens, you have lots of opportunities to improve. Okay. So I've been doing the testing for the diagnosis at the Loma, Colorado library in Rio Rancho. We do it free on Tuesdays and Thursdays for about 3 hours. And if anybody needs a place to go, we're happy to have you come to do I can do the testing, kind of give you some information. But the reality is, when Fritz asked me some questions, instead of being able to bring it off the top of my head, I have to write my answers down so I can make sure I get all the points. Okay?
Thank you, Stephen.
Oh,
Yeah, I guess
I have mine.
I always like that joke. The one good thing about senility is you can hide your own Easter eggs. All right, so Stephen, I wonder if you could start giving us a brief overview of what mild cognitive impairment is and how it commonly affects people over the age of 65.
So mild cognitive impairment can be identified by testing. Again, Montreal Cognitive Assessment, many mental status exams are very common. All of your doctors probably have them. If you wanted to be tested, you can simply call them and say, I'd like to get a test. What we see is an expected decline in memory and thinking that's natural for when we hit 65. This is something that is a little more serious and is a little more declining. You can identify it, you can kind of see it and feel it in yourself. There's challenges with memory, there can be some challenges with language, there may be occasional judgment question marks, that maybe your family says, yeah, it's right, the next thing to do. Most people who have moderate cognitive impairment, they know they have it. I know I have it, yeah, I can tell. And they can feel their mental function begin to slip a little bit. Family and close friends are likely to kind of notice that there's something a little different, okay? No big problem. The changes are typically not bad enough to really affect your daily life, okay, and what you're doing. But it is a potential forerunner for Alzheimer's, okay? Typically, if you look at large populations, the percentile of those with mild cognitive impairment who are gonna go on to have Alzheimer's is about 13%. Not huge. It's amazing. A fair number of those who have moderate cognitive impairment actually will improve over time and go back to normal. A similar number will stay about the same. It'll be kind of just a persistent challenge. So it's not to be feared. It is again, it's more of things that are happening short-term memory, not long-term memory. And you kind of notice that you're beginning to be a little different in what you remember. And those 5 items wife used to give you, and you go to the store and get them, you're getting smart. You're writing them down now. Otherwise, you got to call, and then it's, what? There was only 5 things. Don't do that anymore. I just write them all down. So that's kind of what the story is about mild cognitive impairment. Again, the number, about 13% of all of those who have it. And the question is, well, how many is that? You know, they're suggesting that probably 1 in 5 people, almost 20% of the US population might be at risk for MCI. But only 13% of all of that big number is potentially going to go on to an Alzheimer's patient. So.
And is that what exceeds like a normal rate? Or like you were talking about, there's something where you don't actually have mild cognitive impairment diagnosable, but that you're just generally getting older and is there a difference between those?
Yes, mild cognitive impairment has a distinct difference in short-term memory and the ability to do tasks that you had planned the day before, okay? So person who has, you know, they're not thinking quite as well, they'll still be able to have most of that cognitive construct, whereas the MCI, it's, what? It's 8 o'clock in the morning. You told me yesterday you were gonna need the car. I don't remember you doing that. Yeah, I told you, right here, told you. And you go, golly, what's happening here?
Right.
So yeah, it is pretty interesting.
So you had noted that the detection rates, you talked a little bit about a few of the tests, and maybe you can talk about SAGE, you mentioned to me earlier, where you can take these tests online, and you can talk about how reliable those are, but the detection rates of mild cognitive impairment in primary care settings are low. And what's the reason for that? Maybe different tests, or what?
You know, the barriers to diagnosing mild cognitive impairments are really twofold. There is a significant under-awareness about MCI within the typical public setting. A lot of people don't even know this exists. Okay, so they're not asking their doctor, hey, can I get tested for that? Which they can do. Most family practice and internal medicine docs can do this. You don't need the neurologist for this. If you have a positive test, now sometimes your internist or family practice doc will say, you know, because I know that maybe 13% of this, of all the people who are gonna have it, might have a problem, maybe it's worth having you see the neurologist. You guys can discuss that. But a lot of that will depend also on watching and following the current status. How are you getting a lot worse? Yeah, that needs to be done. If you're staying very stable, maybe not. 2 very common tests are given: the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, the Mini Mental Status Exam. Most docs have these. They're good. They're sound. There is an opportunity, though, for you to do your own testing. As long as you're honest with yourself, you can't lose. These are called the SAGE tests. This is put out by Ohio State. Capital S, capital A, capital G, capital E. Okay. Self-administered Gerocognitive Evaluations. Okay, just put in SAGE test online, on your computer. There are 4 of them. What they recommend is to you to do one. Okay, gotta be trustworthy for yourself. Do one. Wait a couple months, do another one. Wait a couple months, do another one. So you do about 4 of them in a year, but not back to back. The goal, see if there's some progression. Okay, things get a little worse. You need to talk to somebody. Or you can get as we talked about, the Montreal Cognitive Assessment or the Mini-Mental Status Exam. Those 2 tests are separated by education. Any mental status exam is typically given if you have not had more than a high school education.
Which one is that?
The mini mental status exam. It's a bit easier. Montreal Cognitive Assessment is done if you have had more than high school education. It's a little harder, therefore it's a little more accurate.
All right, nice. So we're gonna get into a little Alzheimer's here. How does MCI differ from Alzheimer's, and what are the key indicators?
So,
And what?
again, MCI is typically a short-term memory loss. You have a tendency to ask the same question 5 minutes apart because you forgot that they gave you an answer, okay? It is distinctly more common in a situation where you have Alzheimer's. You're looking at fairly significant progressive long-term memory loss even. They have trouble. Where did I grow up? Where did I live? Where am I now? Where am I supposed to go? It is certainly a significant differentiation that allows us to identify the MCI early enough, hopefully, to make impacts so the progression is less. If you're in the 13% that is going to make amyloid or tau plaques, we can't stop that very well just by doing, certainly we want you to do the things that are described in a book, Sanjay Gupta's book on Keep Sharp. It is noted that there are multiple other things, such as diet, such as exercise, such as sleep, such as social interaction. Not only do they affect your memory, they actually affect your genes. Your genes are changed by doing those things. And so in Sanjay Gupta's book, he talks about the multiple areas that you can use to positively affect not only your cognitive status, but actually the genes that are also working on your memory are going to be in a positive, much more positive way. So the process of testing, et cetera, just gets you to where we want you to know the most. And don't forget, the SAGE tests, if you just need to do them independently, they're fine. They give you good data.
That's fascinating. The genes, I'd never heard that.
Yeah,
that's like that's cancer does the same thing. The change alters the genes.
They alter the genes. It's amazing.
Wow.
So are you saying it's not a good idea to become a hermit?
I think that there may be some people who do just fine being hermits, but it doesn't seem to be a positive effect for most of us. Right.
So, Ron, what is the current medical consensus on testing for Alzheimer's, and who do not yet exhibit strong symptoms, and what are the primary reasons behind that?
Good question. You guys, this is a really good panel because you got a doctor and not a doctor. So you're gonna hear kind of different terminology and different thought process. MCI, and Stephen, you'll correct me if I'm wrong. The way I think of MCI is we're all familiar with pre-diabetes.
Yeah.
And we know that we have to make some changes to make sure we don't get full-blown diabetes. I think of MCI as being pre-dementia. Doesn't mean you're going to get dementia, but if you want to not get dementia, it's a really good idea to do some things to change. And he kind of implied on those. So right now, as Stephen said, really it's these cognitive tests, especially in New Mexico. There is, in order to determine whether someone has Alzheimer's, there is a PET scan they can do. But that test is not available in New Mexico because they need a radioactive isotope that they would inject into your bloodstream. That isotope has a half-life of 6 hours, and it's not created in New Mexico. It's the only radioactive isotope, I guess, right, and not created in New Mexico. So you'd have to go to Dallas, Houston, Phoenix, or probably Denver in order to get that test. But that's to actually test for Alzheimer's. They would be able to see those actual changes in the brain. Stephen mentioned that Alzheimer's has two distinct proteins, amyloid and tau, that are the markers of that disease. There is in FDA study right now a blood test. It's actually a blood test to look for the tau marker, but it's not fully approved at this point. So potentially in the near future, there'll actually be a blood test to show whether or not you have Alzheimer's.
Wow.
And we use the word Alzheimer's, which is a distinct disease that is a type of dementia. I mentioned earlier that my mom had diagnosed as mixed dementia, which usually means she had Alzheimer's plus another type of dementia. So you've probably heard of Lewy bodies, dementia with Lewy bodies. You may have heard of vascular dementia. You may have heard of frontotemporal dementia. None of those are Alzheimer's. They're different diseases, but we tend to think of them as the same. And so as we're talking, sometimes our language is going to get a little confused between what is going from MCI, because I think the real fear for me, Stephen, isn't necessarily just Alzheimer's, it's going into full-blown dementia. So going from MCI to one of those dementias, fortunately, the ideas are the same. And he already mentioned those. I think of those as four different things, right? Exercise is important. Eating healthy is important. He mentioned socialization is important. The other thing is, okay, I know your brain is not a muscle, but act like it's a muscle, use it or lose it. So keep using your brain, right? Keep doing things that make you think, are kind of the four key important points to try and reduce your risk. I hope I answered your question.
No.
I talked way too long, Steve.
No, that's fine, of course, no. Well, you know, you think about that, I've read in some instances the ethical part of testing, or what results from testing. Some people are afraid of it. I know my mother is afraid of it because she doesn't want to be seen as somebody with dementia, and yet we want to help her if she has it. See, you know what I mean? There's,
Yeah.
and there's some, and then we want to not hurt her pride and all that. There's a bunch of issues that go into this. So psychosocial, I guess. How do we determine whether you should test, or do you keep it to yourself, or is it part of a family enterprise?
I think the sooner you know, the better you have options to make adjustments to your life. Those same things that can reduce your risk also tend to slow down the progression of the disease. So even after you're diagnosed, if you're being active, eating healthy, staying social, using your brain, the disease tends to move at a slower progression. Is that guaranteed? As Stephen said, no, nothing is guaranteed about any of this, but generally that's what we see. So I think the earlier you can get that diagnosis, and the other thing is the earlier your family gets to deal with it. As a son, so I have 5 brothers, my poor mom had 6 boys, which probably actually leads to dementia, I would guess.
Especially during the teenage years.
Right, I mean, yeah, she had to go through that 6 times, right? Yeah. And we're not necessarily easy boys to have been a mom to, I think. But as I look at that, we were very fortunate in a lot of ways that we kind of got started in the early stages where we were able to make a lot of plans. And how are we going to deal with what's coming? Because when you're in that diagnosis, there is no cure for Alzheimer's. There is currently a couple medications. Actually, I think there's now one medication that potentially can slow down the progression of the disease, but only if it is given in the early stages of the disease. It's Leqembi, I think, is the brand name, Leqimbi, I think it is. Well, I got it right, yeah, I'm pretty good. What it does is it removes amyloid from the brain. So it does not do anything about the tau protein, it only removes amyloid. It is not a cure. Again, it's only shown to slow down progression, potentially up to 25% over the time that you might be in that first stage. It is not without risks. There's actually a fairly high percentage of people that end up with brain bleeds. And so it's also risky medication. But you only get that if you get that early diagnosis, right? And I think of this disease, or of these medications, yeah, they're high risk, but guess what? When cancer medications first came out, they were pretty high risk as well, right? We got better as we learned more. I think the same thing is going to happen, that as we get more medications out there and are able to learn more, those medications will get better. I don't know that any of those medications will ever be a cure. But again, slowing down the progression, I told you my mom was 20 years. If it slowed down that progression for 4 years, that means it turned 4 years into 5, where she'd be in the early stage instead of only 4 years. So to me, there's a lot of benefit to that. And again, I think, and I get the ethical thing of, hey, I don't want to, especially, so we talk about 65. 65 is generally what we think of as a starting point, but we worked with families where she was diagnosed at age 50. I was working with one family where he was diagnosed in his 30s. It can happen earlier, and that's when the ethical thing becomes even more questionable, because a lot of times those people are still working. And so how do they continue to maintain the life they have with a diagnosis, and they have to figure that out. But again, I go back to, hey, the sooner I know, the better I think you're prepared to plan for the future.
And what is the trigger to take the test from the MCI test to the Alzheimer's test, or is that, am I misunderstanding that? Is there a...
No, and let me just complement the data. A new drug was actually approved yesterday or the day before. Donanemab is now also approved, does exactly the same thing as the first medication. So it is, now they have 2, so they're trying to get more people in to try and get the clinical trials done on those drugs to find out exactly how much value is this going to be. It works exactly the same way. It binds the amyloid protein, doesn't do anything to tau, so it's hard to know how much value it's going to have, but certainly there are people who want to give that a trial. Same exact side effects, the brain bleed, brain swelling that you have to deal with. Your question?
About you have the tests for the MCI, and then what triggers a test, and before you actually go to Colorado and get the radioisotope test, are there tests between those 2? So that you know, like, you have a reason to go get the isotope test.
The best answer I can give you to that is, if you have a positive test, and I would think you were somewhat, and I'm not 75, which they will tell me you can't have the medicine anyway. If you were in your 60s, early 60s, mid 60s, and you found that you had a positive test, you definitely want to see a good neurologist. That's, in my opinion. I don't have a good answer for exactly when and where you go to have further testing. I say see the best neurologist who deals with dementias and cognitive loss, and get their expert opinion on what is the next best step. I like the treatments. I think they have a positive, but actually the treatments are only effective in 37% of people. At least that's what the data for the donanemab also gave. It's only about 37%. That's a lot of risk to get a 37% improvement. I need the neurologist to tell me your case is such that you will benefit. I'd like to hear that. I'm not able to give that kind of information. So I would suggest seeking out the best people who are constantly involved in the use of and treatment of those medications.
And I would just want to add, I agree completely. and Loveless and Presbyterian have great neurologists, and the UNM Memory and Aging Clinic is world-class, people.
Great.
Yeah,
Great.
UNM Memory and Aging Clinic. Now, it's gonna take you 8 months to get in and see them the first time, at least. But they're world-class. In fact, there's only, I think 30, clinics across the United States that are recognized, by the, federal government as being at this class, and UNM is one of those. And so we're very lucky
Wow.
there, yeah.
That's great.
I think one of you said something about you can't take this drug, or there's an age cutoff point, like if you're in your 70s.
No.
It's, what
No,
was
I-
the comment about 60s or 70s?
I probably said, I would, I should phrase this, that it would seem to me unlikely that they would want to experiment with this drug in patients who are in their mid-70s or later. It just seems like it's too risky. I'm speaking for myself.
Okay.
I still think you need to see the best neurologist, and if he says, no, it's a good
Or
chance,
she.
let's go, or she, absolutely.
Sorry.
Then let's go with that.
I'm still feisty.
That's okay, it's good.
Physicians are busy. It's hard to get in to see physicians. They care for you as best they can, given the time frame that they have. But what I haven't seen in either my mother or my spouse is the forward thinking and the proactive approach to doing any of this testing with your practitioners, with your general practitioners. And if they did do it on my mom, who died at 98, after having some dementia for sure, I think, they never continued to test her as she got older.
So the Alzheimer's Association did a survey and found that only about 50% of primary care physicians are comfortable diagnosing dementia or Alzheimer's. So that means 50%.
So the SAGE test is so easy to
50% are
do.
not comfortable with that.
It also
So-
depends on how new.
So one of my recommendations is gerontologists, geriatricians, they're people, they're doctors that are actually, hey, that's their specialty, that's who they really work with. So as we age, I think it's really important for us to begin to looking for, hey, I need a doctor that's more comfortable working with someone my age. It's almost like, right, you know, when your kids are small, you took them to a pediatrician, you didn't take them to the general practitioner, you waited, right? I think it's almost the other way, that hey, as we age, we should start thinking about, there are general practitioners that say, hey, I specialize in working with the older population. They're great, but a lot of them that are younger aren't as familiar and as comfortable with working with diseases and conditions as we age, especially our brain.
I have to say that I also think medicine is changing so quickly these days that what may have been acceptable or what they didn't do 5 years ago is different than what they do now. So it makes a big difference.
Hopefully it's progress, not regression.
I think you were also talking, about the other side of it, where if there's 50% of physicians that are comfortable doing these tests and doing the assessment, what percentage of people are comfortable admitting that they might want to do it or need to? Is that sort of what you were getting at too?
So in my
And
experience.
how do you encourage them? You know, it's like.
In my experience, people that, especially as they're moving into dementia or Alzheimer's, they generally don't want to be tested.
I
My
think-
mom would often say, even after she had been tested and diagnosed, she'd say, very skeptically, she'd say, you know, they say I have Alzheimer's disease, because that's what she called it. Instead of Alzheimer's, she called it Alzheimer's. Like, I don't believe it, no, I don't have it, even though she was right in the midst of obvious having the disease. So, it's actually pretty common for people them not to wanna be tested, and eventually not want to go to the doctor at all because they're afraid the doctor's going to notice something's wrong. And they don't want anyone to know. Sorry.
I think there is an issue with insurance as well. Like if we have relatives with Alzheimer's, but I know that some of my brothers and sisters don't wanna deal with that because they don't wanna be denied insurance, because they're still young, so they don't wanna do anything early due to that.
The testing is, at least where I do it, is free. There are other places, if you're aligned with the American Federation of Alzheimer's, they are advocating that we do them all free, which is fine. I think if you look, you may find that there may be some in the South Valley or others where docs do these free, but I would hope that they would, because that is the only way we seem to be able to make an impact, is to find a way to let people know where they are.
And the Sage one online that's free,
And the
right?
Sage Online is free, and our only hope is that you're honest with yourself. Because if
Right.
you're not, then all of a sudden you don't, that'd be a problem.
And once you're on Medicare, you get one free test a year automatically. So if you're on Medicare, it's covered. So, I mean, that's one good thing about Medicare. Medicare doesn't do a great job of covering once you're diagnosed, not real good, but as far as the care you're gonna need. But they do a good job of paying for that diagnosis to begin with.
Okay, great. All right, let's switch it a little bit here. Can you discuss both the medical and the lifestyle risk factors that contribute to MCI, and maybe what preventive measures we can take? You talked about hypertension and stroke and some of these as medical factors you might have, and you can certainly help those with medications. But what are some of the things we can do, or first of all, what are some of the lifestyle and medical issues, and then what can we do about them?
So, I only give the name of the book because I think it is probably the first book that really has made a strong clinical impact in the progression of mild cognitive impairment, and that is Sanjay Gupta's book on Keep Sharp. It's at the library. I have a copy. I've read it multiple times simply because it provides such good balanced information. The reality is that the lifestyle changes are real. As we've already mentioned, lifestyle changes affect genes. Genes affect tau and amyloid. These are things that can make a huge positive for you. So if you look through his book, he will talk about the Mind Diet. It is a distinct diet developed by people who were looking, they mixed the Mediterranean with one other diet to give you the pieces that actually have the best opportunity to promote the metabolism of bad stuff and the production of good nutrients that will help you. Sanjay requests or suggests by data. He had everything in his book that he recommends is data driven. It is, and so the references are huge in the back. So it's got to be between 150 and 450 minutes a week, both aerobic and muscular training. You need both. Both of them play a role in affecting the physiology. He talks about an essence of 8 hours of sleep. If you're not getting 8 hours of sleep, you are harming yourself. You really. I remember so clearly reading a short pamphlet on a gentleman who said, I never sleep more than 4 hours. I run every day, I do all of this exercise, I never get more than 4 hours of sleep, and I do fine. And he died in his 40s.
Lord.
Yeah. It doesn't work. So the sleep is critical. He stresses immensely finding purpose. You gotta have a purpose. You can't just be here and exist. You have to have learning, you have to try to learn something new. We can't sit down and watch TV and watch the game shows or whatever people do and not learn something. And then lastly, there's discovery. There are so many unique things to do. I've got people who do, they make art out of broken pieces of glass, and they make them look spectacular. And you're going, I never even thought about doing something like that. But they're looking for ways to widen your concept of what's out there and what you do in a way that makes you cognitively safer, because you're building up all of these good neural connections. Of all the things that he identifies, and if you read about the worst thing that can ever happen to you is to be alone. If you are alone a lot, this is a very bad thing. It is very bad for your brain. So camaraderie, social connections are absolutely, of all the things he says, it is probably the most important. And you've heard of the group, trying to remember what country it's in. It's an island, Okinawa. All the ladies live to be 95 and 96, and they're all still alive and doing fine. And on their 90th birthday, they get to ride in the blue convertible limousine down the road. Everybody says it's your wonderful birthday. It's an incredible hundreds, almost 1,000 people who are in communication with each other all the time. They all do all the things. It's just amazing. We stay way too isolated as Americans. Practice a new language. Learn to play a musical instrument. I can now play the piano. Yep. It ain't no good, but it's good. It's good. I do have a copy if you wish. There are online cognitive promoters. There's nothing wrong with these. You've heard of them: Lumosity, Elevate, Peak, Cognifit. If you do them on a regular basis, they are of value. They're stimulating that cognitive effort. So there are multitudes of opportunities. You just have to think about that: eat right, exercise, sleep well, stay happy, keep your mind active, and you can make a huge difference in cognitively where you are and cognitively where you're going.
You know, my wife plays this game. I forget the name right now. It's almost like a crossword puzzle. And she says you should be doing it. But I'm a retired educator, so if I read technical papers or higher level reading, is that just as good as some of the things you were just saying?
Absolutely. If you are reading,
Because I have to concentrate, right?
exactly, you're focusing and you're reading for content. You're not reading to say, oh, I read that. No, you're reading because I want to understand what this is saying, and that is the value. You maintain that cognitive function. Yeah, it's very, very powerful. Reading is great. It just can't necessarily be about, John running through the woods. It helps if there's some impact to you about what that is.
Does a novel count?
Sure they can. I read novels. My current book is Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. It's kind of a novel.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
So it's not just nonfiction.
No. I think anything that is, provides you pleasure, it's got a vocabulary that maybe stretches you a little bit, it's all good. And the best thing is tell somebody what you're reading. Tell your spouse every night. Okay, it's been 2 days. I want to tell you what's happening in my book. That is the best. The notice that I have read is the best. Try to let somebody know what you're reading. They don't even have to pay attention, but they're just sitting there. Just tell them what you're reading, because when you read, then you're reminding yourself, I got to tell somebody when I'm reading it. I got to focus, and so that makes it much more valuable.
Book clubs are great for that too.
They are.
You said tell your wife, so we assumed that they weren't paying attention.
Just don't join a book club there. You just read wine labels.
Yeah.
Sir, did you have a question?
Yes. Speaking of reading, it sounds like a Bible study would be really, because
Absolutely,
often a lot of
because it's a study. You're
Right.
trying to learn
Yeah.
for detail and
Yes.
remember things, and how do they
Yeah.
affect what's happening now versus 1,000 years ago or whatever. Yeah, absolutely, that's connection, that's great.
So I
what-
think most-
a quick,
Oh, go ahead.
yeah, a quick question I had was, when we are, if the, Alzheimer's dementia resident moves in, they have different places they can live. The benefits of, aging in place or having a continuum of care retirement community where they're able to transition in the same community and not move from place to place. Say, have an accident, they have to go to the hospital, then go to a nursing home, for rehab, and then come back to the assisted living. Different staff members, you know, different locations. What are the benefits of having care provided in the same location where they live versus, having that,
New
disjointed-
environments all the time.
Yeah, new
So,
environment.
Can I?
Sure.
It's a tough one.
I have an answer too, so.
All right, good.
Good question, thanks.
And first of all, it's a personal family decision, and that is, again, a great reason to get diagnosed early and be able, ahead of the game so you can talk about it, right? Because we were able to talk with my mom, what do you want to happen, right? What do you want, and finding out what that person's desire is, right? Because we can't assume that everybody has the same desires. My mom did reach a point where she was living alone in her condo, and we said, okay, we've gotta do something. She can't be living alone anymore. And she had a nurse coming in, she had, Meals on Wheels coming in. We had the support systems there, but at some point, the support systems are gone. There needs to be more than that, because she's no longer able to function, no longer able to recognize friend from foe necessarily as they come to the door. Those kind of things. I'd taken her car away, but still, you know, she still was a danger to wander off. So there was a lot of danger. So we decided, okay, I actually gave all my brothers a homework test and said, okay, everyone, you gotta decide, can mom move in with you? Now my mom, I grew up in Northern Illinois, so my mom was still living there. We were living here in Rio Rancho. And my wife's a nurse. And she and I looked at each other and we talked about it for a couple weeks and came to the decision, no. We weren't prepared for it. Even though my wife's a nurse, she's not a geriatric nurse. She's not an Alzheimer's dementia nurse. She actually works with preemie babies. She says, I don't have the skills. I don't have the knowledge. And we must recognize this is, they call it a progressive disease. I actually think of it as a regressive disease because the person's going to continue to progress. They're going to continue to get worse. The behavior's gonna continue to get worse. The brain, the memory's gonna continue to get worse. And so we recognize that, hey, yeah, we could take care of her right now, but we don't think we can take care of her in 6 months, and we're gonna be right back in the same decision making. So we found the continuum of care place where she was able to go into one place. She started in assisted living. She only stayed there about 2 weeks before they realized that she really needs to be in the memory care unit. She moved over to memory care unit, and eventually she moved over to skilled nursing as she lost ability to basically do anything. She could no longer walk, she could no longer feed herself, she could no longer make it to the bathroom or anything like that. Because that's the progression of the disease, to be realistic. The progression of the disease is the brain, which controls all parts of your humanness, is gonna go away. It's dying. Alzheimer's dementia kills brain cells. A person with Alzheimer's dementia's brain is significantly smaller than it was earlier in their life because the brain is dying. And so we had to look at that. And so, but it's a family decision, right? It's how are we going to be able to do this when mom requires 24-hour care? When she really needs somebody there, because again, the people with Alzheimer's dementia, it's not uncommon for them to start getting confused with day versus night, and being awake at night when and there are things we can do to try and address that, but yeah, it's a tough decision. Steve, I'll let you add on.
You know, a couple of thoughts came to mind. I don't know if you've ever read about the Netherlands. The Netherlands have these huge facilities for their aging, and they are remarkable. They have cognitive stimulation, they have excitement, they have all kinds of interactions, and these people who become somewhat more frail have a tendency to maintain cognitive function because it's so stimulating there. And they love it, and everybody knows each other, and they are constantly in interaction. So the Netherlands has kind of the ideal promotion. You're never gonna get the US to do this, for whatever reason. I don't know. Maybe it's because the Netherlands invests in that. The government tries to develop some of these so that there is some investment in that. There's some payment by the people who are in there. But when they survey them and they survey the families, everybody's thinking, can we move in? We love it here. Everybody's great here. So there is a way to make a facility that can provide all of the necessary medical and still be a very positive, homey-like experience. So at least if the Netherlands can do it, we probably can. Do remember, for all of us here, as you get older, frailty, that's kind of weakness, the challenges. Frailty promotes cognitive loss, huge. If you're frail, if you have trouble doing things, getting things put together, and you're by yourself, frailty will promote cognitive loss. So this is a real challenge because as others have had it, you have to be able to provide appropriate services. But who's providing them? Somebody who's paid to come in and say, here's your lunch, hi, bye. That doesn't work. And with everybody else working, so trying to find those facilities that have that environment of, we come by, we come chat, we bring them dinner, we help make sure she's got everything, we talk with them for a while. Those are the ideals, but they're harder to find. And I think that lastly, I think that there are a lot of people who try to do care at home, who look into services to come in, and at the same time try to provide care at home for a period of time when they feel that the person they're caring for is that important. So I've certainly seen husbands do it. It's a little harder for wives because if they're hitting their 90s, the frailty is too much. They're just too frail to be able to support, a husband who weighs 140 pounds even. It's just too dangerous. So all of those factors play.
And it's a danger to the person who's the caregiver, because they tend to stop caring for themselves. I'm spending 24 hours a day caring for my wife, so I'm no longer eating correctly. I'm not sleeping 8 hours a night for sure because she's not. I'm not getting my exercise. I am not doing my reading or anything to stimulate myself, and I'm doing no social interaction because the only person I interact with 24 hours a day, because I'm taking care of my wife, is my wife, and she doesn't interact. So in other words, I'm causing myself. I wanna, if I can.
Yeah, please do.
Because I do have to leave at 11. So I wanna mention this. So this is from the Lancet. So that's the Brits. The Brits actually are doing some really cool stuff on Alzheimer's dementia. And that's actually one of the things that people are doing research worldwide on this, and so you're seeing a lot of different things. But what they did is they put together, hey, what is kind of a risk factor? I don't know if you've seen this before.
I did. I need to get a copy.
It's pretty cool. But what they said is, hey, how can I reduce my risk? Or what are the things that increase my risk for getting dementia? And so you can see up and early in life, those of us who went through and actually got more education, we reduced our risk. Again, if you think of the brain as a muscle, again, that is not a muscle, but the more you use it, the more it's going to stay active, right? And so those who went and got more education, they actually reduced their risk. But you can kind of see some of the things as you go through there. Hearing loss is actually a problem. And the reason hearing loss is a problem is because it affects social interaction, right?
I was amazed at the significance of that.
It's very significant because you lose so much in social interaction. So that's why if you have hearing loss, it's why you really want to go get those hearing aids. You want to get that addressed as much as possible. But you'll notice a lot of those things. One of the big things, if you go through there, is you'll notice a lot of those things are the same thing your heart doctor's been telling you about keeping your heart healthy. I did not know this until I started working at Alzheimer's Association. 20 to 25% of the blood your heart pumps goes to your brain. Think about that. 1/5 to 1/4. And the reason it's that is when you're actually thinking harder, your brain is actually using more blood. So it's actually sending more blood that way. So it makes a lot of sense that things that affect my heart affect my brain. So you'll notice on there, hypertension, obesity, smoking, a lot physical inactivity, right? All of those diabetes, all of those things that we know affect our blood flow probably affect our brain as well. The one other thing I want to point out about this chart is you'll notice the very bottom. All of those things they call modifiable. And they say that's only about 40% of what can cause dementia or Alzheimer's. 60% are things that aren't modifiable. So in other words, genes. So my mom, if you have a direct blood relative like I do, my mom, I'm at higher risk. If you are female, you are at higher risk. If you are Hispanic, you are at higher risk. If you are Black, you are at higher risk. And so there are certain things that we just can't change, right? Your age 65 is generally what we think of as a start, but your risk increases every 5 years past 65. So I can't do anything about my age, right? So there are a lot of things you can't do anything about that, hey, the risk is there. But 40%, that's a fairly good number to say, hey, I can reduce my risk by 40% by doing certain things. The other thing real quick, I want to just tell the story, and it goes back to your question actually. So when we made the decision that, hey, you know what, because I went back to my brothers and said, any of you, can you take mom? And they were all like, no. And so we made the decision, we need to find a place for her. So I went through, I was power of attorney, I was leading this, even though I'm the fourth oldest, because my 3 older brothers, they are a mess, okay? Nobody wanted them making decisions, okay? But I went through and I did a lot of research. I called A Place for Mom. A Place for Mom, you guys have seen those commercials?
Mhm, yeah.
It's legit. I recommend it highly. They were very helpful for me in thinking through. Did I just go immediately with whatever they recommended? No, that's not who I am. I used to be an engineer. No, I'm looking at all my options. So anyway, I identified 6 places that were potential matches in Rockford, Illinois. Everything from one was like I knew we could not afford it. It was Shangri-La. I think they had hot tubs in the rooms. I mean, it was a place I wanted to move into, okay? And one that I call One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest was the bottom one. It was institutional as you can get. Cement floors, gray cinder blocks,
Fire hoses.
steel doors. It was not a place you wanted to go. So I went and I spent 2 weeks taking my mom to one of those places every day. And we would go walk in and we'd do this tour, and that's where A Place for Mom was really helpful, is they recommended, hey, here's what you want to do when you go look at those places. They said, when you go in, they're gonna have it all cleaned up, they're gonna have a room for you to look up, and they're gonna have this path, and everything's gonna look perfect along that path. And they said, go on that path, and then when you come out of the room, accidentally turn the wrong way and walk down the hallway, where they don't expect you to walk, right? It was great advice, right? Because yeah, exactly, I was able to see things, I was able to smell things that maybe they didn't think I was gonna smell, right? So anyway, those are some great things. So I took my mom to each one of those, and we kind of went in order from Shangri-La to that. Afterwards, everyone I'd say, hey Mom, as we're walking back to the car, I'd say, Mom, what'd you think about that? She'd look at me and she'd say, it's all right, I guess. I have no idea what that meant, right? We went to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and as we're walking out, I said, so Mom, what'd you think? She looks at me and she says, don't you dare put me here. Which gave me, now I knew the others were okay, right? So I actually appreciated that. But here's what I learned. So we chose one, and she got put on a waiting list. Because here's the reality of all of those places. The good ones they have waiting lists.
And big deposits.
Big deposits, they're expensive. You know which one did not have a waiting list?
One flew over the cuckoo's.
So again, that goes back to thinking about this early and having a plan, so you can have a plan, because if you need to move mom in tomorrow, there's only one place you're gonna be able to move her into, right? And there are situations where people have to move their relative immediately. They have situations that have to, so think about those things ahead of time. Fritz, I gotta leave, so I appreciate
All right.
everything. Commercial is, the Alzheimer Association actually is just right up here in the same, strip. They're great resources. So call Craig over there. Thank you all. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Ron, thanks for coming, thanks for joining us. I did wanna mention what Frederick brought up over here about the different places, and, you know, I've understood that the more MCI, more mild cognitive impairment you have, the more anxious you get about different environments. So this would strengthen the idea of finding a place that would have one step to the next where you could remain.
Well,
Is
and,
that-
yeah, for me, it was very important, cause my older brothers, I already told you about my older brothers, but they were like, it's too early, mom's not ready, she's doing fine. And I was like, she's not doing fine, but I don't care, cause I'm power of attorney, it's not a democracy, I get to decide. You guys are just, I'm informing you, not asking you to vote. But I told them, I would rather move mom in too early than too late, cause I would rather she know that the people in the purple uniforms are there to help, than for her to be terrified of them for the rest of her life, right? And so that was my thinking of, hey, you know what, let's do this while we still have options, rather than wait until we don't have options.
That's a
Yeah,
really.
thanks, Ron.
Thank you.
At that time, my mom passed away at 84, she spent the last 12 years there, so she was 72 at the time.
Progress that fast.
Generally, once you're diagnosed with Alzheimer's, 8 years before, is the generally accepted number. It can be anything, it can be 1 year, my mom was 20 years, which we tend to think of as a long-termer. But generally we say 8 years is what you would expect. Thank you all, sorry.
Thanks,
I
Ron.
had to run.
Yeah, take care. Yes.
I think, it has occurred to me, cause my mom passed away about a year and a half ago at 95. And we had home care for a while, but the home care workers were not that communicative to us and didn't notice, things that were progressing, going downhill. And we probably should have paid more attention to that. But then there was also the psychological component of feeling guilty for moving her into a space. And I think that was a difficult decision, that has to be factored in. And I know with, Fritz's parents, you know, there's the kids who think, oh, you know, we're gonna feel guilty for putting mom or dad in a space. So how do you get over that?
Safety.
Safety.
I think safety.
It's all safety.
It's one of the.
You are
big
not
issues.
allowed to let your mother be unsafe. We are not allowed to do that. Or our father, we can't do that. It's not fair.
Not
They have-
fair.
Not fair. If they fall and they injure themselves, if they get broken something, whose fault is that? It's ours. We did not put them in a safe position to be able to continue out their life to the end.
Well, my mom used to fall and she wouldn't tell us. And-
Well, in any facility you would put her in, they would be monitoring that more closely.
Yeah.
What you're hopefully trying to do is balance it all. So, yeah, mom has a tendency to fall a lot. Okay, we're just gonna keep her in a chair in bed. Nope, that
No,
won't work,
that's-
guys.
yeah.
What is your policy? Oh, yeah, we have someone who will walk her 3-4 times a day. And you may come and walk her anytime you wish, which is trying to get the family to stay part of the program. So, you know, I worked as the head of a rehab unit. It was actually a nursing home down in Truth or Consequences when I worked down there for the Public Health Service. I would tell you that 90% of the people in the facility had family members, I made rounds every day, had family members there when I made rounds. They knew when I made rounds, hey, Don, just want to see how the mom doing. Okay, we're here, yeah, we come by. Bob's here today, Henry will be here this afternoon, or whatever. They took care of their parents. That has fallen away to some degree. Mom, just put her in there. We'll go see her once every other month. It just doesn't work. They don't get, as you know, the stimulation. So I think it's a very personal thing, being willing to go and care for, from your perspective, the facility's doing their job, but we have to provide that social interaction if there's not any there. And especially if they're developing a progressive cognitive loss, they just need to see us. So that's
You know, I
my
would
perspective.
second what that lady said. I'll tell you what, we had this very problem with my mom, who had a bad case of Alzheimer's. And you know, it's dog hard to find a competent home health care person or a facility. So if any of you are facing that with parents, or you're worried about yourself in the future, you better start looking early, talking to people, because I'll tell you, it's a son of a gun. And it takes time, obviously, you know, check out 4 or 5 places. It's really time consuming, and it's difficult.
We have a guy who's going to be in the next seminar, from Stellar Senior Housing, you might know it, Frederick, Wes Morrow. And he's got a deep familiarity with all of the facilities in Albuquerque. I think there's 160 some, including all the 10-bed facilities, that are nursing home kind of facilities, but he's whittled it down to maybe 60, and he does an interview, and then he suggests 2 or 3 that would likely be a fit for you, and it's free. I mean, he gets paid by the facilities. But it's a really nice service. So anyway, I just wanted to mention he'll be one of the speakers at the next.
Is that in a month or so?
In a month, yeah. And
Will
yeah,
that be here?
Deep knowledge, yeah. Probably here, yes. Yep. He has a real deep knowledge of these places. So whether it's an independent living, and that's the intention, is to get. I haven't got those people yet, but we have somebody from an independent living facility, somebody from a memory care and assisted living facility, and hopefully another one. So that's next time. Awesome. Any other questions?
I have a question that was from earlier. You mentioned there were 2, I forget what they were, proteins or amino acids or something.
Amyloid tau.
Yes. Do they have different functions?
They do.
And what are the different functions?
Well, amyloid is a protein which tries to scavenge for things that shouldn't be there. And in this case, it makes mistakes. And so the amyloid protein is out there, and it's affecting the brain cells. The beauty is that the treatments that they're giving are treatments that are autoantibodies, so they attack the amyloid protein. Now, once the amyloid protein's been attacked, what's really remarkable is the immune system says, oh, this is bad stuff. So the immune system completely takes it out. Tau proteins, amyloid set in the spaces between nerves. The tau proteins actually set within the nerves. Much harder to get those guys out of there because you don't take nerves out if you start doing that. So it is a very challenging process. But right now, Ron had said that there was one medication out there. There are 2. They just had re-identified. Both of them work exactly the same way, but they can only do the amyloid. That's all they can do. And again, that 37% effectiveness is still kind of low. So we got a lot of work to do to try to find the medicines that affect that positively. So all of the things we do now, while we're still comprehensive and cognitive, are hugely valuable in trying to slow this process down.
What about stem cells?
Stem cells is a what? I don't know anything
How
about.
are they working with stem cells to try to
Regenerate your
Regenerate.
neurocognitive function? No, ma'am, not that I'm aware of. I don't know if anybody's given that a shot yet. Yeah. Yes, sir?
My wife had Alzheimer's and she was on, I think it was Dementia.
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah.
what happened to that?
Well, those drugs still exist. Yeah, those drugs are out there. They're anticholinesterase. So, acetylcholine is how your brain talks to each other, how the nerves talk, mostly through acetylcholine. So, but acetylcholine is degraded by cholinesterase enzymes. So if you have an anti-cholinesterase enzyme or drug, it blocks the cholinesterase from carrying down the choline, and so you have more of that continuing to be functioning. They work for a period of months, 3 months, maybe 6. I wasn't impressed. But
So you're saying they work for 3 or 4 months and then they're no longer effective?
they're no longer effective. They don't work for very long.
Yeah.
I have seen people on them for 2 years.
That's a waste of
You can't
money.
really tell that they're doing much, and certainly in 2
But
years.
it's hard to measure.
But when you didn't have anything else to give, and they don't, what do? Part of medicine is trying to provide a sense that we're trying to do something to help you. And if that even has a placebo effect, shoot, we'll take it, okay? Well, if you got you on 2 drugs, how's she? I don't know, doc, I think she's getting better. Great, okay, that's a positive, because there's nothing else I have. And, so yeah, it's tough, and people in their 70s and 80s are not gonna get these 2 medications, they're not gonna do it.
Oh,
It's
they
just,
won't
it's
prescribe
just
them?
too risky.
Because they're too- yeah.
It's too
Oh,
risky.
really?
Oh, yeah, it's way too risky.
Because of the brain bleed?
Brain bleeds, brain swelling, absolutely.
What does that not happen to a younger person? Or
Their
less so?
physiology seems to be able to tolerate the medications and the, treatments so that they do not have as many, but they still have some. But because of their younger age, they simply can tolerate it.
One of the things they did with my father with cancer was slightly different, is he said he wanted to be a trial, even though he was over 70 at the time, he wanted to be a trial for medicines, because if it worked great, and if it didn't, he was dying anyway, so
Right.
he wanted to be in the trials, so.
But then the medications coming out from these 2 groups that make them are not gonna allow it. It's, you can't say, oh, yeah, we won't care. Oh, look, he brain bled and died, we're gonna sue you. Oh, no, that sue stuff, it's terrible out there.
Yes, I know.
Anything I can do to get free money? No, they're gonna be very picky who they choose to allow to have this.
Is that why there's such a shortage of doctors in the Albuquerque area? It was my understanding that the governor sometime, maybe not this president, but New Mexico has some very tough laws for doctors to be able to afford malpractice insurance. Is there anything to that?
When I was in practice, malpractice insurance was of course covered by Presbyterian for me. Matter of fact, every place I worked, other than with the public health service, I had to buy my own, which was okay. The cost of that for doctors employed by these big groups, there's no cost. The institution pays for that. For private practitioners, probably, 3 years ago, 2 years, 3 years ago, there was a huge, bill to try and allow the insurance companies, to, affect their costs for, errors, et cetera. And, those challenges ended up creating a significant rise in the cost of insurance for the many. There are many private docs out there who don't necessarily have a strong connection with any of the groups. Most of them are subspecialists though. The group that does the bone density treatments, the indica group that does that. A large group, that had a diffuse, population of docs, they were trying to pay for all their insurance, and they really had a tough time when the government increased it. Cause the industry, the, insurance industry that covers the malpractice were going bankrupt. So if you're having care that is not effective and safe, the only way to try to get it that way is you have to raise your malpractice costs, in order to stimulate a more focused, effort on doing things well. So it's a balancing act. It certainly
Yeah.
is. I don't ever blame an insurance company alone because the insurance companies are making good money anyway. But if they want more, it must be because, their losses are higher. And I will tell you that the juries in, New Mexico are almost always finding for the client, not not the insurance group, and so that drives costs.
So for a typical doctor in private practice, what's the ballpark figure for their malpractice insurance?
When I had to practice down at TRC, it was about $30,000 a year.
How many years ago was
Actually,
that?
A
yeah.
long time ago.
Actually, I have a friend who's a gynecologist and his insurance is
Oh.
6 figures.
Yeah.
6 figures.
For
Yeah.
gynecology, it is, yeah, it's huge.
And,
I was gonna
and
say.
it wasn't that, 3 or 4 years ago. So it went from 5 figures into 6 figures.
And I'm gonna say it's not just New Mexico, because.
No, it's not just in Mexico.
Because my son-in-law is in Texas, and his is in 6 figures.
So now a doctor, I hate to be picky, but if they're paying $200,000 a year for malpractice insurance, they can write that off their federal income tax, can't they?
Yeah, but they have to bill it to be able to pay for it, so that's why the
have to
medical
earn
costs
it.
continue to rise.
It's what?
You have to earn it.
You have to
first.
bill it to be able to pay it, and so that your medical costs are rising because that's what's added into the whole equation,
So what does all that tell us? Guys, stay healthy out there.
That's right.
Yeah,
Do
go.
all these cool
Don't
things
go
here.
behind
Do all
that
these
tech.
cool
Yeah,
things.
come on, just stay healthy, eat right, exercise, sleep well, stay happy, and be happy.
And mind, what does mind stand for?
Mind diet.
And what is the MI, is there an acronym for something?
I think it is.
Can I throw a wrench in there, in being healthy? I practiced for a long time in Indiana. I managed nursing homes, and I started out actually in memory care. And one of the things I noticed about New Mexico, marijuana is legal, right? Is there any effects that we're seeing as far as memory and marijuana and such? Any effects there?
That's a good question, and I do not know the answer to that. I haven't seen any papers to suggest that someone has tested, that per se. If I ask, no, wait a second. If I ask you guys to show me your hands if you have tried marijuana, I would only do it for one reason. I don't know I never had a patient in my practice, I did all geriatrics. None of those guys smoked marijuana. They thought it was dumb. But maybe that's changed it now. Maybe there are adults who are using it for relaxation or muscle problems or aches and pains that they get as maybe sleep. I don't know, maybe they are. And maybe that makes a big difference in what they're using it for versus recreational. Recreational, because people don't see a limit, or maybe young people can handle it. I don't know, I've never had it, I don't know what it's like.
And the reason I'm asking, because in the same way, I'm gonna look into the Netherlands to see what I can, learn from them. They have other countries that use this in retirement communities. And
They use marijuana?
Yes,
Okay.
Israel is actually one that uses.
It's controlled,
that
but they
allows it.
they control it and use it for their specific things.
Right.
Great, it's not, as far as I am aware, it doesn't have a lot of bad problems. It is the long-term risk of getting hooked and or the short-term risk of taking too much and falling all over the place.
Right.
Which you don't want.
Interesting.
Sam?
Yes.
I'm one of those wants to know. We okay?
Yeah.
So I have noticed, I have memory problems and, so I said something to my primary care doctor, who's not an MD, she's a nice, you know,
Nurse practitioner.
yeah, nurse practitioner, thank you. And so she gave me this test, it was about 20 minutes. Now, I know somebody else who was tested and it took hours, so I don't know, okay. So, I took the test, I screwed up 2 questions, what can I say? And she sent me for a brain scan. What are they-
Seriously?
Seriously, what are they looking for? I mean, what do you see?
I don't know if that's part of the routine, cause my sister had the same thing, she had a brain scan, and they repeated, she's been diagnosed for a couple of years, and they repeated her scan one more time, in the last 5 years, I think.
May I ask you your age?
74.
74. So you're gonna have brain shrinkage because you're 74, okay, it's gonna be different than when you were 54, okay, it's not gonna be as much as you'll have it when you're 84. So, the brain scan will show a little bit of brain shrinkage. If it showed, but a regular CT scan cannot get an accurate look at the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is where the memories are. And so if you wanna do that, you have to do an MRI to look at the hippocampus.
Right.
And if you see a bunch of holes in there, you go, oh dear, we've got a problem. And that is possibly what that's part of the dementia process, that's part of the amyloid being, eating up and doing a bad thing, because the hippocampus has got holes in it. So unless she had some reason to suspect a tumor, a mass.
No.
But you're gonna have normal brain shrinkage, but it's gonna be diffuse and everywhere. And the report should say, small amount of brain shrinkage compatible with age. Okay.
So, assuming there's no holes in my hippocampus,
Hippocampus, right.
what happens now?
You are in control. This is wonderful. You're in complete control.
I'm not controlling
Sure.
anything.
If you eat right, if you exercise, if you make sure you get in your sleep, if you're socially interactive, if you're trying to learn and work with your mind, you are going to be able to do better. You are not defined by a previous test that showed that you missed 2 questions. You're defined by what you're doing right now and moving into the future as to whether or not you're gonna allow yourself the next time you go in to have 4 questions you don't do well. You can fix this. You can. You're in control. This is good. This is good. So
Okay.
that's where we all wanna be. I wanna be in control. If I screw it up, I gotta admit it. But I'm gonna give it a fight before I get there.
So at this point, I don't need to run out and find a neurologist?
No, ma'am. Well, if she said that you had mild cognitive impairment, and she felt that you would benefit from having the opinion of a neurologist, then that would be a wise thing to do.
Right.
Until you get that information from her, buy Sanjay Gupta's book, read it.
That's what I'm going to do, actually.
Do everything he recommends, and you have a great chance of doing well.
What about those over-the-counter medications that you see on TV?
Vitamins and stuff?
Good
Prevagen
question.
and,
Nariva
Okay.
and Prevagen.
I have an article from, there is a gentleman down in Miami. His whole focus is on efforts to treat patients with cognitive loss. And he has programs that are absolutely fantastic in being successful. And he says that he has looked at and evaluated every one of those medicines, the something gin, whatever, all of those. They are absolute trash. They do nothing. He has tried them on, he has tested them and made sure that they are absolutely worthless. He said what Sanjay Gupta says is the route and the road to go. All that other stuff is just bogus. So please don't waste your money. It won't work.
From an operational perspective, I think the most value I've seen for Alzheimer's dementia is having a continuous relationship between the caregiver and the resident. So when you have, many facilities, especially we struggle with staffing, you're having staff going around, then that's not really good for Alzheimer's dementia. When they have continuous caregiver, they almost start to recognize that person almost like a family member. The family gets to know them, and I think maybe even for the home care cases, because sometimes when you are with a home care company, they place whoever is available to come care for your loved one. But if you can find somebody who does private duty, you develop a relationship directly with that caregiver. They get to know your family. It's almost like what is it when you
It's like an auntie.
Yes,
Yeah.
They become part of the family. That they know they like this. They like to eat at this time. They have rituals they do before they go to bed and all these kind of things. So operationally, I've learned that that relationship, the continuous relationship, is the most value I've seen beyond everything else.
Except my mother, who said, I don't want anybody coming in because I'd have to entertain them.
Well, consistency has always been one of the greatest attributes anybody can have. If you can be consistent in doing something, if you can be consistent in your efforts to stay cognitively sharp, you are going to just do much better than those who are not. Well, I'll think about it tomorrow. I'm not gonna do that today. That's where you get in trouble. It's gotta be consistency.
My father had Alzheimer's. Am I doomed genetically?
Oh, if you really wanna know, go see your neurologist. I can't tell you. Neither can your primary doctor. They don't know.
But there is a genetic component.
There is a genetic component. ApoE4 does have a tendency and been identified that the ApoE4 does have a higher risk. ApoE3 doesn't do anything. ApoE2, actually you have less of a risk. So, but if you have the ApoE4, it isn't absolute. Everybody with ApoE4's got it. If they don't, it's just a higher risk. So it still depends on what your efforts are in maintaining a lifestyle that promotes all the positives that you still can do. So don't use it, I wouldn't worry about it in that way, but if you are worried, worry and fear are the worst thing you can have. They create epinephrine and they cause us to lose all kinds of function. Happiness and joy, there is no epinephrine going around in you. Everything's just great stuff, and we maintain excellent function. So fear is a bad thing. If you are afraid, and the best way to get you away from being afraid is see a neurologist, please go see him. Tell him what the tests show. Let him look at the brain study you had, and then get some really good advice. Okay? That's what I would encourage you to do.
Okay, but my last question is, what are the most promising areas of research that you know about in terms of both Alzheimer's and MCI, and also, what are some of the opportunities that people may be able to be involved in studies? Is there anything like that that you're aware of?
Yeah, to get into the study, you've probably gotta go through UNM. Most of the other neurologists are relying on UNM to get them into any of the studies. The second medicine and the first medicine, the monoclonal antibodies are probably the best for treating what is probably, someone has declined to the point of, you passed MC, you passed mild cognitive impairment, you do have an early Alzheimer's, and maybe we can get some of that amyloid out. Remember, that's gonna work in about 37% of the people, that's all. Okay, 100 people, only 37 are gonna have a benefit, and there's some risk to it. My honest opinion is, if I came back 2 weeks from today and said, God, they diagnosed me with Alzheimer's. Okay, well, you're gonna go get the medicine? Well, I don't really think so. You know what? I'm gonna take Dr. Sanjay Gupta's book. I'm gonna do all the things that I've been doing, and I'm gonna keep doing them, and I'm gonna have a good day every dadgum day while I'm here. And at some point, I will be. I think you have to balance it all out. You can't live forever. No one's gonna get there. And if every day you're having that you're here is good, well, that's a good thing. and at some point you have to admit that we will all kind of deteriorate a little bit. That's my perspective, my personal perspective. I think everybody can fight and struggle and work as best they can. And I think you going to see a neurologist makes a heck of a lot of good sense, okay? You've got some things there that it's worth getting better information about. But please try to stay away from fear and anxiety. They are the biggest killers in this situation. They are what will cause you to have more psychological and physiological problems because they're affecting all of those genes that need to be affected by positivity and confidence and assuredness that you're okay. You gotta do that mental balance.
That's a great ending point, don't you think?
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.